what do we do? How do we process this feeling that sometimes can bubble up when it feels as though we are distant from God? The book of Acts, which we're beginning to dive into this week, and we will for the weeks ahead, really meets us in this space. Chapter 1 of the book of Acts, starting at verse 9 through 11, tells a really interesting story. Right before this, we know that Jesus was resurrected and he was walking around for 40 days with people. He was in the flesh and teaching and being with people. And at the end of those 40 days, we know that Jesus says his last words. And as we find in verse 9, Jesus then ascends into the clouds. He literally, a cloud comes and wisps him up. And it is from there that the disciples must have been staring for quite a considerable amount of time, trying to process what just happened. This seems really otherworldly. So Jesus just climb up clouds into outer space? Like, what? Minds being blown. But their focus was on Christ, who was up there, who was distant, who was not present here anymore. At least it felt that way. But the story tells us something really fascinating. The story says that two angels come down, or angelic figures, I should say, and they say to those gathered, "Why are you standing here, looking toward heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way that you saw him go into heaven." And my favorite illustration of this, the ascension, is depicted in a painting from about 1,000 years ago, where Jesus is at the top of the frame and he's sort of floating up in the clouds, and you see the disciples gathered on the ground and their feet are very visibly touching the ground. And you see with some movement that the angels come onto the scene in the middle of the frame, and the angels, rather full of expression, are looking at the disciples gathered together who have this gaze towards Jesus, and the angels are pointing down. Not at anyone in particular, but they're pointing kind of in the midst of the thisness and the nowness of those folks being gathered together. Why are you standing here looking towards heaven? The Christ who was taken from you into heaven will come in the same way that you saw him go into heaven. Here, resurrected in the flesh, amongst community, in our midst, present even after ascension. It's a helpful reminder to me, even when I feel as though God is far away, even when it feels like there's so much happening in the world, to pause and to really recognize how God is present in all of this. To look for those moments, those little angels in my midst that show how God is present here. It can be compassion that people have shown one another, especially over the last 2 weeks. It can be the stories I've heard of people caring for each other and providing food for each other and checking in on each other and caring very deeply about people and their mental illness and taking the initiative to check in on others that they are concerned about regularly. I've been blown away by these little signposts all around me lately that have shown how Christ is present here. And not just in the places where I have seen God in the past. I invite you in the comments below to share the signposts, the angels, if you will, that are drawing you attention to the present. and the places where you have seen God in your midst this last week. It's a good question to ask regularly. Where have you seen God? And what's drawn your attention to God in our midst? I hope you're well, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.